my name is Amanda Terry. I'm managing partner at ACTAI Ventures. ACTAI Ventures is a early stage fund investing in companies that are using digitization to make industries more scalable and processes more replicable. We also like to invest in companies that involve technology for good, solving the world's challenges aligned with the UN SDGs. And I am so excited and honored to get to sit with Lars Rasmussen, who is, one of our limited partners, actually on our advisory committee for the fund. So thanks, Lars, for joining me today.
That was a pleasure. It's a pleasure. Well, what a cool event to here in Sardinia.
Yeah, so this is, I guess, the second annual ACTAI Sardinia. The focus is on longevity.
Yes.
I was not able to attend last year, so I heard that was also excellent in terms of content. But man, we've had some good speakers that I've been learning a lot.
It's been exciting, yes.
Yeah, and then obviously you and Bill did a nice fireside chat on investing, which I think a lot of people want to obviously hear your perspective. So thanks for also kind of letting us codify a little bit of that here on video as well today. So, for anyone who doesn't know Lars' background, founded Where To Technologies in early 2001 with his brother, which then was acquired by Google in 2004 and became Google Maps. So you're always known as kind of like the father of Google Maps. Tell us a little bit about that story of starting it with your brother. I know you're Danish, were you still in Denmark at the time or already in the States, or what was the story behind that?
Yeah, no, actually we were both in the States.
Okay.
Back then, yeah. So we were born and raised in Denmark, but I left Denmark in my early 20s, ended up doing a PhD in UC Berkeley.
Okay.
And we were both working for a startup, my brother and I, in Silicon Valley, started by a professor I'd met at UC Berkeley.
Oh, wow.
And this was in the dot-com bubble days, so we were like 20 plus years ago, and the stock market was going crazy, and the internet and dot-com, and super heady days. And we worked for this startup that raised $45 million, had phenomenal technology, this algorithm and forward error correction. And yet we couldn't quite make it work.
Okay.
The startup failed.
Forward error correction.
Yeah, so it's about when you transmit files.
Okay.
And you chop it up in little packets, but instead of having the ones that get lost retransmit it, you can use forward error correction. You encode the file with a clever algorithm. You send a bunch of data, and no matter what get lost on the way, as long as enough packets arrive, you can reconstruct the entire file. That's called forward error correction.
Okay.
So you encode it so that it can handle errors without needing particular packets.
Okay.
Resubmit it. And this Mike Luby, the professor, was a dear friend of mine still. He'd invented an algorithm that blew everything else out of the water. We tried to turn that into a business, and arguably it failed. I mean, the company ended up getting sold to Qualcomm, and I think these codes are embedded in pretty much any communications device that we use. Wow. Nobody knows this, of course.
Okay.
But as a business, it really didn't do too well. And part of it was that we were in these heady days of the dot-com bubble. We raised way too much money without having a particular product. We wanted to build around this technology. And then the bubble burst.
Yeah.
Massive stock market crash. The NASDAQ lost 80% of its value and took more than a decade to recover. I'm sure you remember.
Yep, I was.
And
I lived that.
Yes.
That was like my first job out of college, and then it was like boom.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And so my brother and I both worked for this company. I had actually recruited him. So Mike had recruited me out of school, and my brother Jens, I brought him over from Denmark. We worked together at this company. And then when the bubble burst, we all got laid off. And he actually got laid off a little bit before me. He's way smarter than me. And by the time I got my very predictable pink slip, he had this idea that we should work in mapping. Actually, my brother, he has a startup idea every week.
Is he also a technologist, or is he more of a business?
No, so we're both programmers.
Okay.
But whereas I went all the way through a fancy PhD, he's a college dropout.
Okay.
And he has all the big ideas. He's the thinker out of the box. He's the one with the, how can I put it? He has this like everything is terrible mentality that helps him invent new ways of doing stuff. Yeah, he's the kind of guy you wait for an elevator, and while you wait for the elevator, he will tell you everything that's wrong with elevators
Oh my gosh.
and how much better
So
they should be.
he's going to be like prepared if anything happens in the world. He'll have his bunker ready and
That too.
or
Yes,
rocket ship
yes,
or
yes.
whatever he needs.
I always joke with my mom because he only has one younger brother, right? So I have maybe the technical training to take
Yeah.
his vision and see we can turn it into something. And he should have like 10 younger brothers that could do that because he has that many ideas.
Wow.
But he had looked through all of his, his drawers full of ideas, and he had taken the map one out because given how the market was downturning, we really needed something where a tiny team could have a big impact. And he thought his mapping vision was perfect for this, right? And you have to look back all the way, so we're before all the AI breakthroughs, before the iPhone was even out there, right? So we were websites were barely even applications. They were really like a document browsing platform, like the original web, right? And the dominant map site at the time, MapQuest in the US, it was really like you were looking on a page, there was a little map on it, and then a bunch of text
to
on
like
it.
print it out to go somewhere with
Print
like
it
paper
out.
directions.
That's right. And then if you wanted to look at, if you wanted to go west a little, you had to press a button and the whole page would reload and a new image would come up. And my brother's basic vision was, look, the whole page should be a map. And it should be fast and it should be pretty. He also has a design background, my brother, so he knows how to make it pretty. And then the information should be on top of the map instead of as text next to the map. And he has some super simple ideas for how to achieve that. And I remember being immediately sold. He claims it took me 2 or 3 days to realize his genius.
That's pretty quick, yeah.
But that's what we set out to do. And it was just the two of us in the beginning.
Wow.
And we set out coding in California. So we hadn't saved up any money, of course, because we were convinced we were going to be rich in the dot-com madness, right? And so we were suddenly on a shoestring budget. I rented like a room in a shared house in Berkeley, and Jens actually moved back in with mom in Denmark. He hates that part of the story. And then we started programming.
Wow.
And 6 months in or so, we thought we had a pretty neat prototype. And we tried to find investors. And we gate crashed a panel discussion in Silicon Valley about how terrible things were. From an investment point of view, like no one was investing, right? But there was a guy on the panel who had been on the board of that startup. Frank is his name, and we caught him, and he remembered us, and we showed him the demo, and he agreed to help. And he's kind of like, Frank, all the introductions we ever got, including the one that eventually led to us meeting Larry Page at Google and sold the company to Google, it all can be traced back to Frank.
Wow.
Right. And so I often, like, when I advise young entrepreneurs, I'm like, you gotta find your Frank.
Yes.
1,000 people tell you no, and then there's one guy who'll tell you yes. And like often that's Bill's the Frank of Canva, for example.
Yes.
Canva's actually published that tree with Bill at the top, and everyone below it can be traced back.
There's all those articles,
to,
100 VCs turning Melanie down,
right.
and then
there's one guy.
there's Frank, and didn't Bill introduce you to Canva
Exactly.
too?
Yeah. So I'm second level in that tree, right? And then I have a
and
nice
Johnson and
tree below me. But it all for Canva, it all started with Bill, and for my little mapping startup, for my brother's idea was Frank. Right, he opened doors to VCs. We pitched them. No one ever called us back, and we're kind of ready to give up. And honestly, we didn't, only because no one was hiring. Like everyone was busy laying off people, right?
Right.
And so we're like, we might as well continue. And we'd also pitched a lot of friends. Do you want to work on this?
Yeah.
And everyone was like, mapping. Like there was this thing about maps because MapQuest had actually been bought by AOL. It was still a big player back then. And then they had kind of done nothing with it. They hadn't figured out monetizing it. They defunded it. The team left in frustration. And so it was kind of like a known thing that mapping was not really something you could make money from. And so no one ever argued against Jens's vision and the prototype and the features being better. That was kind of indisputable. But would anyone care enough to pay for it? That was where it always, like, no one will care. It's not important. You can't make money from that over and over and over. So we got no one to join us. It was just the two of us, and it was very frustrating. But then I happened to have this friend in Australia who'd also worked for that startup that laid us all off. And he was like, I'll work on it. So we flew to Australia on the cheapest tickets we can get, and he roped in another friend, and top programmers, but at the time, like our friend Noel Gordon, he was working in his dad's clothes cutting factory, and his friend Steven, like top world-class programmers, working in a gas station because everyone was
just
getting laid off.
Yeah.
And so the four of us now
Yeah.
worked for another 6-9 months in Australia. Chow fell in love with Australia.
Where were you in Australia?
So we're in Sydney,
Yeah.
in an old spare bedroom.
Okay.
On machines we'd assembled ourselves, coding away.
Wow.
And then we had a better prototype, and now we're maybe a year and a half into it. Still haven't raised no money. We did some contracting gigs on the side.
Yeah.
Yeah, we cashed in our credit cards. My brother sold his pension back in Denmark.
Wow.
And then now we had a better prototype, and also the crash was a little further away from us now, so investors were starting to be a bit more optimistic about the future, and so we flew back to California. Frank again opened another set of doors for us, and there's one VC, one of the biggest one on Sand Hill Road, had help from Google, Yahoo, Apple. They were interested. They called us back. And they had very famously back then, they're still huge, but I don't know if they operate like this anymore. They had these 12 partners, and they only made consensus investment. This is like well known about them, right? So you had to sell each of those 12 partners, typically one at a time. And after like 3 or 4 meetings there, all very similar, just showing the demo, one of the partners came in and he's like, we want to invest in your company. We want to invest $2 million for 40% of your company, which is a terrible deal by today's standard, right? But in the crash days of we're now maybe in 2002 or something.
Yeah.
Magic deal. And also because it was such a big name VC that we were flying high, and it was the best. And then we got a lawyer who was willing to work for free and only get paid if in fact we closed the money. And we had this conversation with our lawyer. It's like, how can we get a better valuation? And he said, look, there's exactly one way you can do that, which is to get other investors interested. That's the only thing you have to negotiate with, right? And he said, look, I can go to the bars and spread the rumor that this big name VC is interested, and then smaller VCs will want to join just because they want to co-invest with this particular VC, right? And
so were you trying to negotiate the terms at that point? Get a little
better deal, right?
Not
because
40% of the company.
It's a lot. It's a lot to give up for $2 million.
Yeah, and for such a short time, really into the
yes, exactly.
building.
Yes, and we haven't launched. We're just a prototype stage, right? So we still have a lot of production work to do. Like one of the things, so we you need a digital map database to start out with, and you license those. Back then, you licensed those from the company that made car navigation systems, right? They would have the vectors in a database, and then you would build your map site on top of that. And that cost money that we completely didn't have. And so we had just like borrowed a square mile of map data from one of these guys around our house in Berkeley.
Oh my gosh.
With the kind of handshake that once we raised money, we would go to that provider and license their data. Right? So stuff like that had to still be worked out. And so we are not quite like, we thought it was a little too ballsy, too brash to go and spread this rumor. And so we went to ask the partner at big name VC, hey, our lawyer says this. Are you okay with that? And he kind of laughed. He said he just thought it was funny. We'd asked him for ways to negotiate against him, right?
Right.
And he said, look, you're welcome to do that. And he said, we call it the we call it the blessing of having this big name, right? So this was a concept they're familiar with. And he said, you just have to be aware that we haven't invested yet, right? And if we decide not to, all of the people you have told that we're going to invest are going to, it's going to be hard for you to explain.
They're going to reconsider, maybe. Yeah.
And that's what happened, right? So we spread the rumor, and VCs came out of the woodwork, and for like a week we were like this hot deal that everyone wanted to get into.
Yeah.
It felt great. And then we finished the meetings to get all the 12 partners, and we wrote some terms. We didn't actually get any better terms out of this, by the way. And then we developed this habit that every time we went to one of these meetings, at the end of it, I would ask the guy, where are we in your funnel? Right? Because VCs are funnels. This particular one got maybe 1,000 deals in front of them a year. And back then they did one investment a month, right? So you can, I'm sure they tracked exactly what percentage of likelihood does this company have to come out the bottom, right? And we would get to like 10% and 25%. And then I asked, once we signed the term sheet, where are we in your funnel? And they said 70%. And that surprised me, actually. I thought that a term sheet was a more certain investment than that. But so I asked him to explain what happens to the other 3 out of 10. And he said, well, 1 out of 10, when we do the due diligence, we find the entrepreneur has misrepresented something. And then, we never talk to them again. And I knew that wasn't the case, right? So I'm like, okay, so we're at 80%.
We have 80%, okay.
And then he said, in the other 2 cases, what happens is during due diligence, we go and have casual conversations with our main portfolio companies to see if they may be rumbling in your space. Building something like that they haven't launched yet, because we don't like to have competing companies in our portfolio. And also that may imply, if it's a mature company, that your window will close faster than it might seem. And that happens surprisingly often, they said. And that happened to us too. So in a slightly more dramatic way, because the day we were scheduled to go and sign the term sheet, Yahoo, who was a big player and had kind of a copy of MapQuest, that was the second most popular map site, they launched a change to the map site that very day.
Oh, wow.
And they were a portfolio company.
Right, so they're kind of conflicted there.
Yes, and it was nothing like what we were proposing. But still, this was a site that had been completely unchanged for 4 years, and suddenly they started working on it. And our partner at this big name VC, he called me up that morning and said, you don't have to come because it's over. One of the 12 is saying no, and we can't change that person's mind. And we never find out. We were never, allowed to talk to that person.
Yeah, or even say, hey, this is what we're doing differently.
Right. And which they also knew. I mean, this was just like, one of them was like, no, the window's closing. It's not going to work. Deal was over. And so we went straight from being in 7th heaven to being deep in the dungeons of despair. And it was really bad. And then exactly like they had predicted, right? All the other companies that were so keen to invest a day earlier, they found all kinds of different reasons that they were not interested anymore. And it was pretty painful. And then we took a few days. I called my mom in tears and explained what had happened. And she said it's because there's something better waiting for you out there. It didn't stop me crying, of course.
Yeah.
And but it was still an insightful thing. And what happened was that then 3 days later, we made 3 phone calls to the 3 people that had been the most bullish about our vision for mapping, right? So Frank, of course, was the first one. And he's like, look, I know this real estate company might want to buy you. We took the meeting, but it was just not interesting. And the partner at the VC, who had been the bullish one, who had to give us the bad news that one of his colleagues was blocking the deal, he said, look, I can probably get you like $500,000 from friends as like angel investors and so on, but honestly, you're onto something, you can do better. Right, but let me know.
Wait, that was Frank who said he could.
No, that was one of the partners at the big name VC,
right?
Okay, so
he
because,
probably felt badly.
Yeah, but he also the way it works is, and this is something I have to keep reminding me, right, that when you talk to any organization, right, you talk to the person who is the most interested in making the deal happen.
Yes.
Right, but you don't talk to the people that are most likely to kill the deal.
Right.
Right. And so
you
get a skewed picture of what the organization thinks like because of that, right?
Yeah.
And so this guy was generally wanting to invest, right? But he was not allowed because the company he worked for made only consensus decisions, and that's just they were all used to it. This was a famous property of this particular VC. And that's what happened, right? And so you still have someone who's at least your friend, and that's what he offered. But there was this other guy, Ram Sharam is his name, who was not the partner at the VC, but he was kind of I think an LP, in this fund, and he was someone they would bring in when they ran into teams like ours or only techies. Right? So he was a business expert, business development type person. He would invest a bit of money, join our board, help us out half a day a week. And they had just introduced us to him, and we had given him the demo, and he liked it, and so we thought we'd call him too. And he said, look, I can't really work with you without that VC investing. But, and then he gave me the most impactful business advice I've ever received. He said, the exact same reason that this VC doesn't want to invest, namely that Yahoo is rumbling in your space, is going to make Google want to buy you. Because they had nothing in mapping at the time. And Google loves leapfrogging. Right? And if you sell yourself to Google and you finish you turn your prototype into a product with Google, that's what will happen, right? You'll get all the resources and all the stuff. And he was also like, I know, it's not what you're looking for. You're looking to raise money, build a company and all this stuff. It won't be a big acquisition, of course, either. But you will have a big success. You'll meet some of the smartest people in the valley, and then your next deal, you can set your own terms. Kind of thing. And Ron conveniently sat on Google's board.
Okay.
He had been the Frank for Larry and Sergey, I think.
Oh, wow.
Like he was the one who had taken them around to all the VCs back then when they had a hard time, surprisingly, raising their first round.
Wow.
And so 2 days later, we were in front of Larry Page, demoing our stuff. And it's Larry is he's a man of few words and even fewer facial expressions. And so we're demoing this thing, and it's very strange because he's like really our last chance of turning this into something. And then one little technical thing that I should mention is that this is in the super early days of the web still. And one of our theories was that the reason all the map sites, MapQuest, Yahoo, Microsoft, were all exactly identical is that the web browser just can't do better. And that to make a better map site, you really have to build a separate browser. So we were actually pitching like an app, a C++ app that you would install on your laptop next to your web browser. And then we were pitching this idea that all of the websites where geography was important enough, they should build map sites, right? So a cinema that wants to sell tickets, they should put it on the map. So we actually had this demo where you could find the cinemas and click one, and then the billboard above, we put this hovering thing up that would show what's playing and when, and you can go buy a ticket right there. That was kind of a demo. And Larry said, look, I like the way you think about maps as a platform instead of as a little adjunct to a bunch of text. But Google is really a web company. Are you sure?
But they were already doing advertising. Like, why wouldn't that have sparked their interest at that point, right? Like, if you could really do hyper-local advertising.
Oh, but that's what he was interested in.
Okay,
But he wanted it on the web. He
Okay,
didn't want it in an app, right?
Yes,
Because
okay.
that Google was really like pushing that the web is the future, right?
Yeah.
And so that was the one thing Larry said. Are you sure that you can't build this as a website? And then he like dropped the mic and walked out the room and got someone else from their corp dev department, actually Megan, who ended up being the CTO for Obama years later.
Oh, wow.
Super cool. And so we went back and had the 3 most productive weeks of our lives in a state, I like to call it a heightened state of motivation, broke completely out of options. And Larry was like our last chance. I mean, we're really broke. and so we spent 3 weeks disproving one of the core theories underlying our own company, right? Because it turns out back then Internet Explorer was still king of the web. And Internet Explorer had put in these wacky dynamic HTML things that was not standard, and that was kind of frowned upon a little maybe by the standards community until Firefox, if you remember, appeared on the stage, and they said, look, to build an alternative to Internet Explorer, we should stop thinking about the standard, that Internet Explorer is the standard, right? And then they built something that could also do that. And then we're like, wow, this could really be the future of the web, these dynamic websites. And so we picked up these ideas. We read this column, this blog from a Microsoft employee, he called himself the DHTML dude. And then we rebuilt the whole thing in 3 weeks. using JavaScript in a web browser.
Wow.
And we kind of blew our own mind that this was possible, or we could do it so quickly. And then we went back to Google. Now Larry had assembled a team of 25 people, and we demoed the exact same thing, but now it was on the web.
Mm-hmm.
And we try to be calm about it. And we're like, was this sort of the thing you're looking for, Larry? And I think it really impressed them. You know, this was before Gmail had even launched, right? So there was
Right,
really
and way
nothing
before
else.
Chrome and right?
Way before,
Yeah,
years
way
before Chrome,
Wow.
and it barely worked, and we were like, it only worked in Internet Explorer, but we were like, but look at Firefox, right? This is coming, this is the future, and Safari was a tiny player back then, but they also were starting to pick up these ideas of dynamic websites, and then Google bought us, and it turned out to be, still by far the biggest success that we've had. Certainly as entrepreneurs, we've had some success as investors too. We can talk about this through this community in particular, but it was such a fun ride. And,
Wow.
And
and then did you stayed at Google for a while? Were you, or?
Yeah, so we joined Google and we headed up the team. We headed up the engineering arm of the team that built Google Maps.
Yeah.
Google actually added this young product manager to the team. He'd been a big advocate internally of them buying us. He actually worked on their local search team that just didn't. They could answer queries like pizza in New York, and they used that little MapQuest map to show you where those pizzas were. He just loved this maps thing they bought. He joined the team, and you might remember his name because he's now the chair of the board of OpenAI. He was the one who took over after all the skerfuffle around some open coming back and so on. And he's also running a really exciting startup now, Sierra, in the AI space. But before then, he was like the CEO of Salesforce that he sold the company to, the CTO of Facebook that he sold the company to. So crazy talented, probably like one of the smartest people I've ever worked with. And he had joined as a PM. Jens and I headed up the engineering organization, and we were just like a team of 7 people when we launched.
Did you the 2 Australians too? Did they stay?
Yeah, they joined. And actually, we asked Google, can we stay in Australia? Because we loved it there. I was sure they were going to say, forget it, come back to California. But I was asking their top VP of engineering, hey, is it okay if we stay in Australia? And he said, oh, yes, please do. And I said, what? And he said, yeah, Larry wants me to build 100 engineering offices in major cities around the world, and I'm 83 short. And so if you build me one in Sydney, I'm 82 short.
Wow.
And so we stayed in Sydney, and I headed up the Sydney engineering office for the first couple of years. I headed up in addition to running the engineering part of Google Maps, and then I handed that all over to this very clever Australian when there was maybe 50 or so engineers. But that was another fun, crazy thing about Google, that they let us do that. And my brother actually did go to California.
Yeah.
And so we had about 50-50 in terms of engineering power in both sides.
Wow.
But when we launched, there were 7 people on the team. That's how small it was, right? And it launched, it was maybe 9 months after the acquisition. We had finished turning the prototype into a product. And it took off like crazy on day one. And
I can't imagine life without Google. Do you keep in touch? Like, do you know how big the team is now that maintains that, or hard to know? It's been so long ago.
I don't know, but there are thousands of people with billions of dollars in budget. And back then we licensed the data from these other companies.
Yeah.
But along the way, once the product became popular, most countries in the world didn't have a database like that you could just go license. And also the relationship with the owners of this data became tense because they were selling this data for $1,000 per copy into car navigation systems, right? I had a car like this, and to get updated maps, you had to put $1,000 down to get these DVDs with maps data on it, right? And the same data Google wanted to use for free.
Right.
On the web. And so that's difficult for the data provider to have both of these deals. And so they put in all these weird clauses in our deal with Google now, in particular that we were not allowed to put a live GPS signal on the map. And so this, of course, in particular, as mobile phones were starting to become more powerful. Back then, by the way, no mobile phone could do this. They didn't have GPS. They didn't have screens big enough. This is long before.
It's like WAP or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe,
We had the most popular mobile application at the time was Google Maps, but no one used it. Like, it was the most downloaded application, but firing up the Java engine, and you had this tiny screen, and the phone didn't have a GPS. No one used it until the iPhone came out. But so eventually, like, Larry and Sergey were just like, look, here's $10 billion. Let's build our own maps database. That was a random number. That's not actually what they said. But it's just like, we got
There's a lot of resources to do it. Yeah.
Right. And we ditched those data providers. And this is not actually my team, but the team sort of has the same origin as Waymo now. So there was this Stanford research project that had won that Darbra challenge of driving a car autonomously through the desert. And Google acquired the team. They built Street View, which is also a data collection thing for all these automated cars, right? And then they went and built, Sebastian Thrun is the head of this effort, right? They went and built this crazy bit of machinery that could build a digital mapping database of the entire world, starting with satellite images, doing a lot of image recognitions of where the roads are. A team in India built a Wikipedia-like function too, so that volunteers all around the world could go and tell us what are these roads, what are the names, what are the turn restrictions, all this stuff. Massive effort. And I think, there's like 5,000 contractors somewhere in a warehouse doing the final processing of this. Crazy effort. Thousands of people, billions of dollars. Insane.
Yeah.
But it all started with this thing that 6 people built using some licensed data. We can license some software to do the routing and stuff. And most of our innovation in the beginning was a new user interface that really captured the imagination of lots of people. I can show Google, oh, this is a better way to do it. Let's put the resources into the back end.
What an incredible story. I don't think I've heard all of that story before. So that was really incredible. I mean, it's interesting. I think yesterday you were talking about how sometimes when you start when it's really hard to raise and, just the environment's difficult, some of the best stuff comes out of there, right? Because you're kind of most resilient, most efficient with your capital spend. And, some companies that are able to raise a lot of money, it ends up, they just kind of waste it, or they're just not, it's actually good sometimes to start businesses in difficult environments.
I think so, for sure.
Yeah.
And even just entrepreneurs that come having been through a lot of difficult things, immigration situations, maybe a modest financial background and so on. I think those are typically the people that really change the world. And in fact, I mentioned this yesterday when we were doing talks, right? That when I take my projects as an entrepreneur, I've maybe done 3 or 4 or 5 big ones in my 30 years, right? And if I rank them according to success and I rank them according to how much money I had at the outset, it's exactly inverse, right? So there were some projects, like in fact the thing we did after Maps, Google Wave. Google invested like 25 million, 60 engineers, office space, all these resources right off the bat, just because we had this big success with Google Maps, right? And that totally failed. Very painfully. And I think exactly this thing that we were so confident, of course, because we had just had this big success, right? And we just tried to do too much, solve too many problems, be too crazy, too ambitious, too full of ourselves. And it just failed. And also as an investor, when I look at our portfolio, the top company, of course, is Canva, that I met through this network. And they had a really hard time raising money in the beginning, right? You got 100 no's from VCs, or is it 200? I don't know, a crazy amount, right? And then there was this one guy, Bill Tye, who thought these guys have something, right? And he wrote me in to help them. They're not techies. Melanie, who's the CEO now, she's a graphics designer, and her then boyfriend, now husband and co-founder, he had, I think, a business school background. I'm not sure. And Bill was like, Lars, if you can find a world-class tech team for them, I will invest Like he made it a very explicit promise, right? And so with 100 VCs saying no, and Bill saying, if Lars will do this for you and give you a check mark, I'll invest, right? And so Melanie had every incentive to hunt me down.
Yeah.
And it took a year, and she was relentless.
And were you focused on Australia? You were focused on Australia, right? Because their team was Australian. Because you kind of had, you probably had so many ends at Google that you interviewed
Yes.
in that region.
Yeah, I mean, so for me, the obvious thing was to try. I had left Google by this point, right? And so I was allowed to go and solicit. I'd been gone for that year, and I thought this was an obvious thing for the people actually on the Wave team that had failed, right? There was a bunch of world-class engineers between projects at Google,
Right.
some a bit frustrated with this failure, right? And I tried to get them to be interested in Canva, but they also had their own thing. And actually the one guy, Cameron, who I thought was perfect because he's both a UI designer and a very accomplished and published programmer, right? That he would be perfect for this graphics design project that Melanie was pitching. But he had started his own startup. And so he had to kind of go through a year-long effort that ended up not quite where he wanted. I think maybe there were also some issues, I don't know, but what was going on. But maybe it was just that he was so excited about Melanie's vision that he actually would do that better. So it took a whole year. And by the way, during that year, to try and persuade some of these guys from Google to join Canva at the time that it was just a pitch deck, Melanie would do all of these networking events, and she would find all of these potential techie co-founder or CTO types and bring them to me, and I would review the resumes and I would interview them, and I'd be like, that's just not, I kept telling her this, like she had unbounded ambition, right? She'd be like, we're going to build the biggest company in the world. And I said, you mean the biggest design company in the world? And she said, no, we're going to build the biggest company in the world. And I told her, if you're that ambitious, you need to start your tech team at like the top of the top of the top, right? If you're willing to compromise with your first hire, you will just never get there. And so, and I think, you can hear when she tells the story how she was ready to kill me because I kept telling her, no, not that one, not that one.
Was she just self-funding then at that point because she was kind of waiting for Bill's check, or did she? Because there wasn't.
Yeah, when they weren't really doing any building because they didn't have programmers, right?
Okay.
But they did have another company that they had built together, kind of bootstrapped, called Fusion Books.
Okay.
That was the same vision of making a graphics design tool that non-professional designers could use.
Yeah.
Like people that have a sense of aesthetics and a desire to make pretty things, but weren't professional enough that they would go and spend the 6-9 months to learn how to use the tools at the time, which are all Adobe's tools, right? And so they built that just for yearbooks. Very particular niche, and they learned through that and proven that they could build that kind of user interface. And they made a little bit of money from there, and I'm sure they had other sources of money, but they weren't really starting the coding, right? They were more like honing their pitch and talking to people and getting the pitch better and the pitch better and the pitch better. I think for that whole year, and because I had no one else than Bill interested in funding them, right? And because Bill had put this condition, Lars have to sign off on your tech team, right? So she kind of had to follow my advice, which was heartfelt. I wasn't trying to be difficult. I just didn't think those people were strong enough to carry through the level of ambition that she had, right? And then eventually Cameron decided against his own startup. He went and joined them. They, I think, gave him a fantastic offer. He became a co-founder. And then some of the other people I had introduced him to, they paid attention. We're all herd animals. And so when they're, Cameron's joining, right? And then Dave Herndon, who's this incredibly sharp PhD out of Queensland, I mean, wickedly technically smart and incredibly productive. Like, I think he single-handedly wrote like 25% of all the code that my 50 engineering team did. He's just amazing. And he then joined. And actually, a fun little story that when he decided to join, he went to tell Google. He was still at Google. Yeah. And he's like, I'm going to join the startup that Lars is pitching. And Google said, oh, no, please don't. And here's 5 times your compensation. Over they quintupled his compensation, both cash and stock.
Wow.
And he was already super well paid, right?
Yeah.
Overnight, 5 times. And he called me up, and he was sad. It's like, Lars, I'm sorry, I just can't say no to that. It's too much money. I just can't say no. And I was sad too. And then I told Melanie, but she wasn't sad. She was determined. She was like, no way, this will not happen. And then she wrote this 25-page sort of graphic novel slide deck about Dave. She went and found all kinds of pictures on Facebook and the internet of him in different states of, and then she wrote the story about Dave and who he was, and he wanted to change the world, and he had wanderlust. But then Google gave him handcuffs, and then Lars came and said, "No, come on, do this." And it ends with him joining.
Yeah.
Actually, it ends with the entire Canva team, just 3 people at the time, holding up a sign that said "Save Dave."
Oh my gosh, that's awesome.
And she said they published this years after, so
Yeah.
I'm not sharing anything secret.
Yeah,
And
dig that up somewhere. It must be somewhere in some article.
That's super cool, yeah. And then he changed his mind again. He joined. Now he's a CTO of a $30 billion company, and it's a great story, right? But that sort of spirit of tenacity, this complete unwillingness to give up, that's the sort of thing that I think makes for a good entrepreneur.
And you were kind of like her Frank from a technical perspective, finding that key.
Yeah, well, Bill,
right?
Bill is their Frank, right?
The Frank for the financing, or just the
but
person
in a sense,
really, I guess, I see what you're saying.
In the sense that if you look at all the people that did something towards that first team and round,
yes,
almost all of them can be traced back to an introduction from Bill.
Yeah.
Right? And they have actually published it as a tree, very pretty tree, because they're a graphics design company, right? And Bill's at the top, right? And he introduced them to a lot of people that ended up doing important things, including me.
Yeah.
Right. So Bill is the Frank, Lars is the first level, and then I introduced them to a bunch of people like Cameron, like David. I also this other friend of mine from Google. Oh my goodness, name escapes me. That's so embarrassing. But we did end up putting together this round, and although it was mostly angels in Bill's network, called Mai Tai back then, we also got 2 VCs to put in, $400K each, and one is Blackbird in Australia, of course, and he also ended up being big in their next round, and that's one of those legendary funds, like the multiple of that fund are
I think
insane,
it's
right?
Canva and safety culture, right? Which Bill also directly invested in.
Yes.
So
and anyway, so Bill's the Frank there. Now I want to try and be someone's Frank too, but I'm perfectly happy being the Lars and Bill being the Frank. And in fact, that one of the things we're working on now that we're super excited about is an AI company called Robin Health, that is building, they call it a pocket bestie, so an AI-driven BFF in your pocket that you can always talk to, sort of a mental health, loneliness aspect of it. And this was where, actually someone I think that heard Melanie's story. She tells the story a lot, and she's super flattering, of course, right? And how she found Bill, and he was the first one who wanted to do something, and then Lars, and so Jenny, who's building Robin, she I'm going to do that too. And she has the same kind of tenacity and complete unwillingness to give up. And actually, she's an MD by training. She has an MD degree out of Harvard. She was well on her way to become a neurosurgeon, believe it or not, when she decided that her life work instead should be Robin Health. And I've rarely met a more determined human. Melanie, of course, is in this category too, right? But it feels so similar to me. Because, it's a very different space, of course. Yes. We're now in mental health and AI, where Melanie was in graphics design and so on.
And 23, right? Melanie was very young.
Very young, yes.
Obviously, Jenny's young, but has been through medical school, a doctor.
Yes.
But I agree with you on that.
Yes. But the fact that it came through Bill and Bill's network is you, ACTAI Ventures invested, Simon invested.
Yeah.
And also this thing where, there's a lot of money being thrown in AI right now. A lot of money. In fact, my friend Brett, he raised $100 million for his startup. It's a seed round.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Which is crazy, right? But he has a name, a background, a network. But Jenny, she's new to this field, right? She has a very impressive resume in medicine. but she's not a techie. She's different. She's unusual, and she's actually having a difficult time raising money compared maybe to other players in this space, right? And I
Yeah.
think although it is rough on her, I do think that increases her chance of success. And she
Yes.
still has to raise the money, and we're helping as best we can.
Yep.
I'm sure we're going to find
It's
it
gonna
because her
happen.
product
Yeah.
is amazing. And actually,
Yeah.
one thing, um, uh, as an investor, you don't always get to spend a lot of time with an entrepreneur before you have to make a decision to back them or not back them. But I got to watch Jenny work for 6 months before I made my choice to invest, and seeing the progress in our product,
Yes.
despite having virtually no money,
Yes.
right? She still was making so much product
Yes.
advances, right? And that has continued. So I cut my, I do typically 100K checks. I cut my checks. A few others did, right? She still, I don't think, has even raised $1 million yet, right? And still, she has built this amazing product, right? That she's just beta testing it now, right? And the feedback she's getting is
Really
through the
strong.
roof, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's an opportunity to change millions, if not billions, of lives here, right? Like the loneliness epidemic out there is, I think, one of society's biggest problems of the day, right? And we all go doom scrolling on TikTok, right? And she's building actually a product on the phone that might get us out of that, which is
Yeah.
an interesting challenge and an interesting vision. And very excited to be working on this.
Yeah.
And hoping that'll be the next Canva to come out of this community.
Yeah.
And,
And she's brought a great group of people around her. I mean, just
Yes.
she's been getting very strong advisors around her,
Yes,
and really
incredible.
yeah.
I mean, the founder of XAI, she met Jensen and NVIDIA.
I mean, intro to Ken Goldman, he invested as well.
Yes,
He's-
and other
yeah.
Canva investors from back in the day, and so she definitely had that skill, and a lot of it is through Bill's network again, right? So
Yes.
this finding that one person well connected to believe in what you're doing, even when everyone else might not believe in what you're doing, right? I mean, there's true value in that, and it's very exciting to be part of. And that's kind of my life now. I became, I wouldn't say full time, but our main job now. I say we because I work with my Greek goddess wife who couldn't
Yes.
make it today. But
Yes.
that's our main thing now, is to help young entrepreneurs. We try to be Bill.
Yeah, I mean, that's what's been so incredible with the ACTAI Global, my tie and then ACTAI Global Network. There's been so much value creation throughout the years of bringing entrepreneurs together. And I think Bill was saying at the intro yesterday, people have met their co-founder, they've met their investors, they've maybe met their partner. I mean, just it's transformed lives, this network. And that's why I feel so honored, to have this fund to be able to, enable people to kind of be part of that side of it. And you've so graciously hosted this community in your home now in Greece, the last 2 summers, which has been incredible. You've brought people from all over the world, entrepreneurs and investors, and then a lot of your local network as well. Talk a little bit about obviously you moved to Greece about 3.5 years ago or so.
Right.
Okay.
That's right, yes.
And what are you looking? You want to be the Frank of maybe of the Greek ecosystem. How is that going? Talk a little bit about that and why you decided you and your wife so graciously hosted our community the last couple summers there.
Look, we moved to Greece on a whim during the pandemic, like so many people did. So in my case, I'm married to a Greek goddess. And there was an obvious choice. It's such a beautiful, beautiful place to live, and they actually handled the pandemic super well, unlike I would argue New York, where we lived at the time. And so we moved. And to be honest, we were not expecting to find a really vibrant startup community there, because 10 years earlier, actually 8 years earlier, in 2012, we had kind of been at a crossroads in our lives, and we had gone to Athens. I gave a TEDx talk there, and we toured the startup community in 2012, and it was a very short tour. And back then, Greece was at the depth of a devastating economic crisis. And although my talk was about using crises as an impetus for entrepreneurship, most of the people we found were more thinking about, how can I leave?
Right.
Greece. And Greece actually lost 500,000 professionals. It's a country of 10 million people. So we're
Wow.
talking significant brain drain
Wow.
in a very short time span, right? And so 8 years later, we came back on a whim for the sunshine and a bit of sanity, and we did not expect a country to have changed that much in 8 years, right? But almost immediately as we landed, we started meeting startup after startup after startup. And it turns out, I think Greece has the fastest growing, not the biggest by a long shot, still a small ecosystem, but the fastest growing ecosystem of Europe. In fact, I'll give you one statistic that blows my mind. You know, when in 2022, after all the COVID money had come out, right, and inflation, interest rates, so there was a big drop in the macroeconomic conditions, right, and investment money dried up across the board, dramatically so in 2022. And I think Greece was the only country in Europe that had more money invested in its startup ecosystem in 22 than in 21.
Wow.
Because the natural growth of the ecosystem is so fast that that actually was stronger than that macroeconomic downturn. And so it is very small still. The first unicorns are starting to emerge. We have maybe 600-700 active startups, maybe 10-15 VCs. They pop up like every week. A lot of them are seeded by government money. Greece elected a prime minister who was a VC himself in a former life, and so he's been very supportive of the community, right? And so a lot of times they put up a chunk of government money and they challenge investors to kind of compete to manage that money, and you have to raise a bunch of private funds next to it, right? And then those funds, the ones that create a good return, then they are able to raise more normal kind of private money rounds afterwards. And so it's growing really fast. And as an investor, as an angel investor, it's a very different environment. Like when we were in New York or in Silicon Valley, right, we get people come at us that do something similar to what I've done in the past, right? So since I have a mapping background, I get pitched all the mapping startups. And then your life is like you meet startup, evaluate startup, invest in startup, try to help the startup the best you can, right? But in Greece, because the ecosystem is so young, you get to also do a bunch of work promoting the whole ecosystem, like including hosting this wonderful community in Greece every year now, right? Which is something that really has a big impact on the Greek ecosystem, because just like I was surprised, and I'm married to a Greek, I was surprised with how much startup stuff was happening in Greece, right? Nobody else knows about it, right? And so inviting people, just come through and see, wow, there's cool Greek startups. And the other thing is that I get to invest in things that are quite far from my wheelhouse, which is fun because you get to learn. So we've invested in a biotech startup company called Rescue Biotech that makes bacteria that produces candidate cures for Alzheimer's. You know, which is crazy
Wish they were
important.
here. That would have been interesting.
That
to
would
hear
have
them.
actually been
That would have
been quite relevant. Yeah, maybe
Yeah.
next year I'll invite them more. But certainly they've missed our own ACTAI in Greece twice for various personal reasons. But they just had a big breakthrough. So they make these bacteria, two groups. One that mimics the disease, but misfolding a particular protein in our brain called the tau protein. And they've constructed bacteria that can produce misfolded tau proteins, and then another group of bacteria that spit out candidate cures. And then they, hang back and watch until one of the proteins correct themselves. And then they pick up the molecule that made that happen, and then they've constructed preclinical trial pipelines for 5 diseases. Alzheimer's is the top one, right? But it's Parkinson's, ALS, that are all believed to be caused by protein misfolding.
Wow.
And so their first Alzheimer's candidate just passed the first stage of preclinical trials, which is with fruit flies. So it cured Alzheimer's in fruit flies, which is a model quite far from humans.
Fruit flies got Alzheimer's.
Yeah, fruit flies can do a lot of things for us.
Wow. Okay.
And it's kind of like a standard first model in this space.
Yeah. Okay.
And the results that these guys got blew the minds of people in the field. Like I don't think anyone has been that successful. It is the first step, right? So there's 2 more steps in preclinical trials, maybe actually 4 now with some new technology, right? And then you have to go through clinical trials. Like we heard this from Dorian, right? That even the clinical trials cost tens, if not hundreds of millions. And so this particular startup, their business is to get candidates to pass the full preclinical trial pipeline,
Okay.
and then they can make a license. This is a standard model for startups in this space. Then they can make a license deal with a big pharma that has deep pockets that can afford to do these big human clinical trials, right? And so it's probably like the longest in terms of time moonshot I've done. Even if this candidate is the cure for Alzheimer's, which would be amazing, we're still 5-10 years out
Wow.
from that being proven.
Wow.
And Greece, by the way, I learned this. I'm not sure exactly how this happened, but Greece has an incredibly strong biotech and medical community, both in Greece and in the Greek diaspora of expats, Greeks around the world. It's just like a thing that's developed. How these
Well, I
things.
guess the Hippocratic Oath, isn't that Greek?
That it may be.
I don't know.
Yes,
I'm
it
just
is.
making that up,
Yes.
but it sounds like that might
No,
be
no, it
Greek.
is. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
He was the
Yeah.
the first proper doctor
Yeah.
in the Western world, right? And you can go on Kos, I think, and sit under the tree where he wrote all his musings about medicine. It may go that far back. It may, for sure. But so that's very, another startup I invested in is a professor at the top technical university in Athens. She and her team has built a 3D printer that prints with human tissue.
Interesting.
And this is a field, I didn't know this was a field, but there's maybe 6 or 8 startups that do this sort of stuff. There's kind of 2 different trends that mimic inkjet versus laser, and my startup is doing the laser version of it, but all the other companies are going to sell these machines to researchers trying to do stuff, and nothing has really come out of it yet, something that actually has impacted medicine. But Joanna, the professor, she's decided we're going to be the first to have a proper procedure approved by the FDA and so on that uses this machine. And so they're working now through preclinical trials very successfully. They're at the last stage of preclinical trials to make a fresh bladder for you. Like if you have cancer in your bladder, I have several members in my family in a generation before me that had this sort of cancer, and I have to take the bladder out, and then you have this bag on the side of your body that's saves your life, but it's a big drop in your life quality to have this bag, right? And because there is no way currently to construct a new bladder, and these guys have figured out a way to do it, in part by taking muscle tissue from
What was the name of that company?
It's called FOS Print, PHOS, FOS Print, and they take muscle tissue from your intestines.
Yep.
And then they remove the lining because you don't want intestinal linings in your bladder.
Yeah.
Intestinal linings absorb nutrients, and you want the opposite in your bladder. But then they take a biopsy from your healthy bladder, grow that in a lab, and then they put that in a printer, put the muscle tissue from your intestines below, and they literally print a new lining on top of it. And then they surgically reconstruct the bladder, and it works at the preclinical level. And interestingly, when I met Joanna, they had raised 0 equity money. It was entirely done with grant money. And now she has this grant from the very prestigious European Innovation Council grant for enough money to complete the preclinical trials, but she needs to raise 800,000 in private money in order to trigger the second million. And surprisingly,
keep in touch.
Yeah, we should.
I mean, typically we're not doing so much biotech just because we're not MDs, but I listen to a lot of demo days, and I like the StartX. It's kind of all related to Stanford startups, and I was just saying there might be a company. I've just been diligencing it with an MD who is using stem cells and doing 3D bioprinting to create like lung tissue, and so it's like one step earlier.
Yes.
Ultimately, they want to create organs for replacement, but even if they can use it instead of animal testing for pharma, it's huge. So this might be, I don't know, there might be something there. We haven't invested yet, but maybe there's something there.
Yeah, well, if you want to look at this, because surprisingly to me, so I was told immediately, I spent half a day in their lab, saw the machine, met the team that's doing the preclinical trials, and I was immediately like, I'll be in that 800K with 100K, but you have to find the other 700.
Yeah.
And so what happened, to my surprise, it's such a explosive story to me, but in Greece, there's so many software opportunities for investors now, and this is, medical stuff takes longer, there's a regulatory question, it's hard to understand if you're not in the field, it's certainly hard for me, and so They have not been able yet to find the other 700K.
Okay.
And then she's kind of caught between two chairs, right? Because then she goes to the U.S. Boston, in particular, is a super strong medical investment community, right? That understand the space. But for them, it's like, look, we've never seen something like that come out of Greece. You see, so on one hand, for me, it's like that's why I get to put my 100K there. I would never get that opportunity in any other country, right? But it is difficult for her now. And so,
well, there's also a biotech investor here. We should get an intro.
Oh yeah,
Do all the biotech.
that's great. It might be easier someone who's close by because like part of it is that even so, she's a university spin-out, and those laws are brand new, right? And another thing actually.
The IP or the.
Well, in terms, yeah. So you know how this happens, right? So you're a university professor or grad student. You do some research that has commercial potential, and then you do a spin out. Because Google started like this, right? So then the university keeps some percentage of the company. Different countries do it differently, but this really has to be supported in law because it's a public university, right? And those laws are brand new, and so she's a trailblazer there too. Actually, both Rescue that came out of a government research institute, not a university, right? But also a spin out, and so these two companies are really trailblazers. In Greece in that sense too, right? And a way I think about this is that there's an enormous potential in Greece because there's so much research and so many big brains in their universities that haven't really had this opportunity to commercialize in this way before, like other countries do. And once these two companies hopefully prove that this can work, right? I think there's going to be like like a waterfall of crazy tech like this coming out of Greek universities. And again, being a software person, and that's, in any other country, I would never see opportunities like this.
Yes.
And I get to learn, I get to study, I get to have cool conversations like this. It makes life super fun. And who knows, maybe Greece will be the country that cures Alzheimer's from this little startup on the beach with a water view.
Wow, that'd be amazing.
I agree.
Well, that was so much fun. Thank you for taking the time to chat. Thank you for all you do to help entrepreneurs and help some of the companies we've co-invested in, and host the ACTAI global community to help open people's eyes to what's happening in Greece and your beautiful now home country. So really appreciate your time, and thank you.
Likewise.
Thank you for your support.
Anytime.